Welcome to Bonus Bytes, a special mini episode of the Triple D podcast. These bite-sized episodes are packed with information about disability benefits, disability news, and answers to your burning questions. Get ready to take a bite of what's going on this week. Here's your host, Michael Weiner.
Welcome, everybody. I'm going to be getting us kicked off today with our newest edition of Bonus Bytes. How are you doing, Katie? What's going on?
I'm good. Not a lot going on. Just doing what we're always doing here, taking listener questions, getting podcasts up, making sure we give the best resources for our clients and everyone out there watching.
That's right. And we've got a pretty good episode this week. Some new statistics that Social Security put out that I'm excited to share with everybody. What do you say we just get right into it?
Yeah, I love a lot of the headlines that we have today because I feel like we're actually bringing people some good news.
Some good data, some good news.
That's right. Okay, so for the first one, we're going to talk about this graphic and we're going to put it on the screen for everyone that is watching on YouTube so that you can see it. But this actually talks about hearings in the way that they're held, and it's really interesting. It shows a change in the last, how long does the graphic go? 6 years?
So the graphic goes back 5 years. It would look, just to explain what it is. So the pandemic changed significantly the way that our practice is in terms of how hearings are held. Before 2020, when you had a disability hearing, most of the time it meant going in person to a Social Security hearing office and having a hearing with a judge. And if you were to look at the statistics going back several years before 2019, or 2018, which is when this graphic that we're going to put on the screen starts, it would look very similar to this. But what it shows is that back right before the pandemic, basically 70% of disability hearings were done in person, 30% were done on video. But I want to be clear about what video means. It wasn't, you log in from home on your laptop. It was still, you go to a Social Security office, sometimes a hearing office, sometimes a local field office, and you would stare at a video screen before and then have a disability hearing with an administrative law judge. Now, you start to see the big change in 2020. Social Security was scattering to figure out what happened all of a sudden. Around April, we had to transition to doing hearings over the telephone. And that year, about half of the disability hearings were done over the phone. The first year you can see the real shift is 2021. In 2021, fiscal year 2021, 96% of disability hearings were done on the phone. So no going into the Social Security office. That's still the way it's done today. 4% were done through online video, which is when they started to roll out Microsoft Teams to do disability hearings where I can log in from my office, our client can log in from home, the judge can log in from their home. But now you kind of see how things have changed in fiscal year 2024 year to date. The offices are back open, but only 15% of disability hearings are actually happening in a hearing office, with 70% of them still being done over the phone, and basically the difference there, the gap being now online video. So we still are doing some video hearings. It's just not a popular platform. The video hearings, it's much easier, simpler, less connection problems when we do phone hearings. But this really is interesting. It shows the evolution of how hearings are being held. And even though the pandemic definitely feels like it's something that's in kind of the rear view mirror now, it doesn't seem like we're going back to court.
So I want to talk about why this is important, though. How does this impact people that are applying for disability? How does this impact you as their attorney? Is it better this way?
So, it's kind of one of these things where it's different strokes for different folks. I have spoken to many attorneys who they're a little more old-fashioned and they still prefer to go into a hearing office and have a hearing with a judge. I'm more statistic-driven. And looking at the statistics in our office without any changes elsewhere across the office to explain it, the approval percentage actually went up slightly since we've transitioned to doing most of our hearings on the phone. I know a lot of people think, well, how is the judge going to see that I'm in pain? How is the judge going to see that I need a cane or a walker if I'm just doing my hearing over the telephone? But the truth is that if your medical records didn't reflect your pain, if your medical records didn't reflect, the fact that you needed an assistive device, you weren't going to win a Social Security case in most instances based on that anyways. So I find them to be more efficient. I find them to be easier for the judges, which is important. I want to make judges happy. It's easier for my clients who don't have to drive to have a hearing held anymore. And selfishly, it's easier for me. I am able to be much more efficient with my day when I don't have to drive to a hearing office, spend time, kibitzing, that's a Yiddish word for, gossiping with the hearing office staff before and after the hearing. We can just get these over and done with. So really, I think that it's been a change for the positive. I'm not planning on requesting in-person hearings for our clients anytime soon. And I think that, again, the math supports that.
Mm-hmm. And it also gives people more options for their disability attorneys, since it is a federal program that you're fighting for. They could hire you if they live in Florida, and you could represent them the same way you could if they were here in Ohio.
That's huge, Katie. And I don't think you can actually underscore that enough. If you look back 5 years ago, you basically either had to hire one of these national firms, which, pre-pandemic weren't necessarily known for having the best customer service, or you had to hire whoever you thought the best attorney was locally to you. Now you can hire any lawyer anywhere. And that's a huge shift that's really helping people, I think.
All right, well, let's move on to our next headline. And we're actually talking about another graphic, some more new data. And this is a bit of good news. Social Security disability hearings backlog is at its lowest point in years.
That's right. And it's interesting because I think that people might be somewhat get false hope from looking at this graphic. When you go back, 6-7 years, there were over 1 million people nationally waiting to have a disability hearing. Now, the most recent data from just April of this year, 2024, shows that there's under 300,000 people now waiting to have hearings. So Social Security has very effectively cleared out much of the backlog. So when you hear that, I think a lot of people think, okay, so why does my case take so long? Why are our attorneys still telling their clients that it's going to be a years-long process? The answer is that even though the hearing backlog has gone down significantly, the state agencies, which determine claims at the initial and reconsideration level, there's more claims pending there than ever before. And they're working slower. There's a lot of issues with attrition, which we're going to kind of talk about in a second when we get to our next news piece here. But ultimately, it's almost been kind of a balancing act. I think the claims certainly move quicker than they did when I first started. When I first started, we would tell clients this process is usually a 4-year process. Now we tell people more likely to take you 2.5 years, something in that time frame. But instead of it being very hearing level heavy, where that's where most of the wait time is now, most of the wait time is at the initial and reconsideration stages. So it's good that the hearing backlog is down, but until Social Security can address the backlog at the state agencies, I do think that we're going to continue to have a wait time for people.
All right, let's go on to our third and final headline. You kind of mentioned it. And this is about an article that came out, and it's the interview with the Social Security Commissioner. So tell me what happened in the interview and why it matters.
Yeah, and so, I can also support this interview with some of my own experiences. When I was in Nashville last week, I was a part of some private meetings with the commissioner where his comments very closely echoed what he talks about in this interview. We'll make sure that we put this news article, this interview in the show notes so people can read it. But it was an interview with Lisa Rain, who's a Washington Post columnist. And, what the commissioner is talking about is he's going for quick hits right now. So there's a lot of change that can be made to improve the quality of this process for people, to make it, improve customer service, improve timeframes that don't involve large systemic change. They're small little things that can be done. And what he talks about in the interview is how he's got a list of 150 goals that he wants to accomplish by the end of this year. So far, over 60 of them have already been accomplished. I mean, we have seen more change in the last 6 months, and I can tell you this personally, more change in the last 6 months than we saw in my first 10 years in practice combined.
Wow.
Things are moving quick. The other thing that the commissioner talked about that I mentioned a minute ago is I think he's realizing that attrition in the employment levels at the state agencies is really a problem. They are struggling to hang on to their employees. They're struggling to hire, which is slowing claims down at the initial and reconsideration levels. But, this is a commissioner who I have to say I have a lot of faith in. I haven't generally been the biggest optimist when it comes to Social Security, but we've just seen so much positive change in the last few years that it's hard to not be optimistic.
Mm-hmm. And, there was actually a headline that we briefly discussed that we're not including in today's episode, but kind of bouncing off of that where they're having a hard time holding on to their employees. A study came out, and it was a survey from 2023 about how the Social Security is the least happy group of employees of all government agencies.
Yeah. I think that it's very circular. I think that the employees are unhappy, but I think a large reason why the employees are unhappy is because they're dealing with an unhappy public all day. The public's unhappy because the employees' happiness, or lack of it, is being passed down. They're inefficient. People are frustrated. Most phone calls to Social Security, both from my office and when our clients are calling, are frustrated calls. Nobody's calling and saying, "Hey, how's your day going? How are you?" It always feels like a tense interaction. So it's not shocking to me that their employees are unhappy.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully with all of these changes that we're seeing, maybe the 2024 survey will be a little bit different.
Yes.
All right, let's go on over to our listener questions. And we're always trying to get through these. If you have a question, you can go to our website, linerlegal.com, and you can submit your question there for the podcast. And you can also follow Michael on TikTok at Backwards Hat Barrister.
Backwards Hat Barrister, check me out.
We always, like to pull some questions from the comments. You do a really good job getting in there and answering a lot of the questions.
Thanks, Katie.
So you do. You're really interactive on there with people.
Well, my fans, I like to interact with my fans.
Your fans. Okay, well, this first question actually comes from one of your fans on TikTok.
All right.
And this question is, can someone qualify for SSDI with their spouse's work credits?
So the answer is no. I mean, let me give two answers. The way that I believe this question is being asked, can somebody qualify for SSD with their spouse's work credits? Like basically, can you transfer work credits from husband to wife? Maybe the wife didn't have to work in the home. The answer is no. Your work credits are only good on your own work record. However, if your spouse passes away, then you might be eligible to apply for what's called disabled widow's benefits on the work record of your deceased spouse. But while your spouse is living, no, there is no transferability of work credits.
Okay, moving on to the next question. How do I get records from an old doctor that I'm no longer their patient because of new insurance?
The process for getting records shouldn't change. I mean, doctors still have an ethical obligation to maintain medical records for their patients, whether it's a current patient or a prior patient. So, as long as you know where that doctor is and where their records are kept, you should still be able to access it. I mean, one thing that's more challenging is depending on how old those records are, can sometimes be a little more complicated if we're talking about, records that were maybe kept in paper and maybe they're, 15, 20 years old, so they're in a basement somewhere. But the process for getting records should still be the same.
Okay. And our final question, this one was submitted on our website, is can I still be approved for disability benefits if I was denied at the judge level? And that's after appealing a denial.
Sure. So I believe what the claim is asking is, can you still be approved for disability benefits after a remand? And the answer is absolutely. What's most likely, though, so when somebody gets denied by a judge, by an administrative law judge, you file an appeal to the appeals council. If that's denied, you file an appeal up through the federal courts. Generally speaking, The appeals council, the federal courts aren't going to outright award benefits. What they're much more likely to do, like 99.9% of the time, is remand your case. They're going to send it back to the administrative law judge with an order telling them what they did wrong and how they need to fix it. And so it's more so at a remand hearing that you are likely to be approved for disability benefits. And statistically, this is important. Generally, people have a much better chance of being approved after an appeals council or federal court remand than they do even at their first disability hearing. Hope is not lost if you get denied by a judge if you appeal.
Something that we always talk about is that the system kind of counts on people giving up and not fighting. So It's really just continuing to fight for those benefits.
Right, exactly.
All right. So that's all that we have for today. But before we go, I did want to talk about what we're going to be doing next week on the podcast. So if you tuned in, last week we did a live Q&A session with Alan Tittle. He's a good friend of yours and a fellow attorney.
That's right. Alan is probably the top medical malpractice personal injury attorney here in Ohio. And it was a lot of fun to hang out with him. We had some donuts. We took questions from the audience. We learned a lot about, his practice and kind of the overlay between what he does and what I do. So definitely tune into that. There was a lot of great information shared.
All right. Well, that is it for us this week. We will see you guys with that episode next week.
Thank you, Kate.
Thanks for listening to Bonus Bytes, a mini episode of the Triple D podcast. Rate, review, and subscribe, and tune in next week for more disability news and headlines.